very much to conversation. I'm pleased to welcome to the program Chris Zelov. And Chris Zelov is involved with a very, very interesting project which has within it a very, very interesting film that we're going to talk about specifically tonight. But the project overall is called the Kenosis Project. And Chris, welcome very, very much to conversation.
Glad to be here.
Wonder maybe we could. Let's talk about Kenosis first view, what your overall, what it is you're up to, your own background, and then we want to get at this incredibly interesting and beautiful film you put together, Ecological Design. But Kenosis, could you share a little bit of that,
okay,
of the organization you're involved with?
Kenosis Project was founded in 1989 after I returned from Europe, coming back to America, trying to figure out what to do next. And I was tired of working in the corporate world.
Oh, you did a green business or something, right?
I'd worked in the software business in the mid-'80s.
Right.
A company out of Silicon Valley opening an office in Paris. So I got to work abroad. And after working for a company for 2 or 3 years, I realized that my psychological makeup was such that working for a corporation was not how I would find the good life.
Even though that was on the cutting edge of the digital new supermod world?
Yeah, but they were...
Isn't there some design possibilities and change possibilities within that world of computer graphics and so forth? But
sometimes there is, but if you're working with a company that's trying to make a return on investment in a short period of time, and the values of transformation and change get mixed with the business values of making money,
right,
and sometimes the ideas get compromised.
Right, okay, all right.
And so in 1989 I realized that I wanted to go out on my own. So the Kenosis Project draws inspiration from the Palace of Kenosis in Crete, which of course is a Bronze Age structure, underground palace, with the first labyrinth in Western civilization leading to the first throne room of Western civilization. So the metaphor that we're using for this project and the endeavors are that we're supplying the educational technology thread that leads the individual through the labyrinth of life to the throne room of high design, science, intelligence.
Magnificent. Anticipatory design.
Anticipatory design, and we're into film projects, we're into interactive video, and we're into solar architecture projects within cities, and also working on the countryside.
Yeah, and you're doing film. You have a film. What is it? It's called Ecological.
The film is called Ecological Design.
Right.
Inventing the Future.
Right, and that has, in a certain sense, in a focus, it's resurrecting in a certain sense. Sad to say, in a certain sense, but it does seem to me it is resurrecting to this proper place the central role, in a very real sense, of our Buckminster Fuller, who, as I well remember, was the mind, as it were, of the 60s and so forth, synergetics and so forth. And he seems to have been, in a sense, eclipsed by this, by events, by the younger generation, and in a certain sense is resurrecting him as we approach the centenary of his birth in 1895. It seems to have a focus particularly on Fuller, although you would love it.
Yeah, Fuller was the tour guide for the film.
Yeah.
Resurrecting is a strong word. Reweaving or reincorporating his work into the work that needs to be done now in the 90s and towards the 21st century, reappreciating his work. Bucky was certainly the inspirational guide that led us through the labyrinth of architecture and design, and his ideas and framework really set up our search and our journey that we took. And we did find by doing this process that a lot of people were very excited about Bucky's work and wanted to talk about it, and there was a sense that he had been forgotten for a while.
Well, I'm afraid that's the case. I mean, I went in to try. I had, as I said to you, I've talked to you on the phone and so forth. Buckminster Fuller was an inspiration to me in the 1960s and early 60s. So was Marshall McLuhan in trying to understand comprehensively what it is that is going on. And he had written these incredibly interesting books, Critical Path and Operating Manual for Spaceship Earth, and I thought the best that he ever did was Intuition, the long poem that he came out in 1969. And he was, as Stewart Brand would say, was the mind or the inspiration behind the whole Earth catalog. And I would submit that he was the central force, as it were, of the spirit. It was what is now loosely referred to as the spirit of the one and only Woodstock Festival in that era. It was Bucky who was the leading inspirational force at that time. And yet I went to go into a bookstore the other day, and I couldn't find in the bookstore it's out of print, the Intuition, and the books weren't there. I said, Fuller, and the young lady said, who is that? They didn't know. But he's beginning to be resurrected, or resurrected, as you say, is a
well, part of the problem, of course,
remembered.
Is that, part of the problem is people don't know where to classify him.
Well, he's a comprehensive.
Right, of course, Americans are suffering from hardening of the categories in many places.
Good. Right.
And so Bucky was someone who was outside of academic departments and outside of the usual classifications that we try to pin on people. Is he a futurist? Is he a scientist? Is he an architect? Is he an engineer? Is he a poet? And of course, this field that he articulated, comprehensive anticipatory design science, and all those words are important, is something that really hasn't gotten enough attention, and the academic world doesn't know how to deal with comprehensive type thinking, or it's hard to find a place for it, unfortunately.
Or in the sense, the world has become specialized. As we live at a time of information overload, we come into an informational environment, and there's so much information, it doubles every 5 years. And specialization, everything has become so highly specialized that a place for a comprehensivist seems on the surface of it, unless you go to systems thinking, seems on the surface of it absurd, because everybody is running so hard to try and keep up with all the dimensions of new developments within their field. The amount of information doubles every 5 years. It becomes exponential and out of hand. But he was, and always did preach, a comprehensive whole systems understanding of Earth, and that Earth within a broader sense of cosmic design and human purpose. And he was a comprehensive.
Right, and of course nature does not have any categories.
Absolutely.
Nature includes everything from A to Z that we can think of.
And it is a seamless web.
Right.
And all of these lines that we impose upon reality, epistemologically or otherwise, really don't have any meaning to Mother Nature or Father Time. And Fuller was a comprehensive visionary in a certain sense in terms of understanding what was going on.
Right. So why do we have specialists? Why does that continue? Well, that's a good question to ask. It's easier to control people if they, my idea of an expert is someone who knows, an expert knows less and less about what's really important.
Or maybe more and more about less and
more less. And more about less and less. That's
right.
Yeah. Well, it's easier that way. That's how the tax system's set up. Television is part to blame, of course, this idea of prime time, this idea of the time slot when certain things will be shown. And so there's a lot of reasons for why specialization continues. That's a whole other topic.
Yeah, it is. Well, the comprehensive approach on the surface of it seems in a certain sense absurd to some people who are trying very hard to keep up, as we said. And yet, like I don't want to get carried away. We wanted to talk some about this film because you bring up some of the most, particularly in terms of an ecological appreciation of what it is that's going on. The Lovins in terms of energy research, and Ian McHarg, his book Design with Nature, and in a sense of an appreciation of an ecological appreciation that I'm afraid can be seen as being superseded by technologically gobbling up of the planet, the destruction of rainforests and the decimation of species and things that are going on now, which is very depletion of the ozone and the other kinds of ecological problems that exist are all there to be, and they're included in your film. So many of the people in your film, one of them says from Bucky on down, people who in a certain sense follow that ecological course, you've been in touch with, and people with living machines, and people who are in a sense of picking up some of the designs from nature, and that we are in touch with nature and having a sense of ecological concern is one of the principal feelings and the sense that is involved within your film, no?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the participants says, or talks about that there's a conflict between the biosphere and the technosphere, and we are the chorus between those two worlds. In a sense, the drama of the 21st century that we're rapidly evolving into is between the technosphere and the biosphere, and the human role is to, in a sense, find a resolution to that. And our technology hitherto has been very primitive in terms of understanding nature as a model of technology. Our technology still uses or takes more than it gives. Our technology of transportation, for instance. And all this talk about the multimedia revolution and how that's going to affect knowledge and information exchange is important. But I think the question is, where is the energy coming from that supports these computers? So obviously technology is not just it's not just an answer in one dimension. We have to look at where our energy is coming from, and that gets back to what Bucky talked about. Wealth has to do with the intelligent use of energy, and we're using less than 1% of our daily income, our daily solar income. We're using less than 1%. We're mostly using our bank account when we could be living off the interest.
Fossil fuels.
Yeah, I mean, any good banker will tell you that's not a good way to carry on.
Even somebody with an MBA.
Well, yeah. We can't expect MBAs to have too many answers, though.
You can't, no?
I don't think so.
But do you think if it is, and we live at a crucial time, perhaps this is the most, Michio Kaku has said, this is the most crucial generation in the history of mankind, in a sense, because we really do, in a very real sense, see ecological trauma with the ozone depletion, with the greenhouse development, and the decimation of species and so forth. And we still do have 50,000 hydrogen warheads that have been part of this technological extended capability. I mean, we live at a very dangerous time where we're at a fork in the road, where one road might lead to, unprecedented kind of liberating use and appropriate technological use, or we very well at a time when, for the first time, we could decimate the species. We're at an unprecedented time in the 200,000-year history of the evolution of our species, and it's a very critical time, a crucial time, where we have to really find some way. And it's hard to find inspiration from the current, or visionary inspiration from the current political and economic leadership, don't you think?
I think we're in deep toxic media syndrome right now, where most media is just reactive and looking at problems at the surface, just looking at events rather than the conceptual level or the deep structural level of the world we live in. And I think H.G. Wells said it best, that life is a race between education and catastrophe. And I don't know if I think it's been like that every generation, but this generation certainly has the power to destroy more than ever before. I think we need to learn to create at the same level we can destroy. That's an issue. And it is a sense the human race is in a critical period. I would agree with that. I don't know if it isn't perhaps in some sort of a qualitative new way when you reach the point where we literally can. Apparently, Michio Kaku was on here a couple of weeks ago, and I asked him. He's a nuclear physicist. He helped develop these things. He's ecologically concerned now. He's one of the leading voices for change. He and Noam Chomsky both, or people that are really concerned with what's going on. And he said that we had done a thing with Isaac Asimov, who had reason to keep track of these kind of things. And they confirm, other people have confirmed, that we do have, for the first time, the technological capability, our extended consciousness, which technology is, to make the world other than what was given, that if it were unleashed, the destructive capability, we could render the habitat of the earth incapable of the continuation of our species. And we haven't been in that situation. We couldn't do it in the Second World War.
We couldn't do it in history. We could kill the tribe in the other valley. But we do have a new Promethean capability to destroy the species. We can't destroy life, apparently, but we can destroy the species, which is something, and we haven't probably been able to do that probably from around 1954, 55, something like that, just within our lifetime, which puts a new kind of stamp of urgency upon that, and we seem to be moving in terms of the old paradigm, in terms of the way spaceship Earth has been operating, in terms of the same old principles of scarcity and so forth, without there being any kind of visionary leadership from our political leadership, or from our business leadership, or from the pilots and navigators of spaceship Earth don't seem to be having a sense of vision.
Well, I think we've made a historical mistake to think that politicians can solve problems, that they can generate ideas and generate solutions. We've made a historical mistake, and of course the mainstream media has bought into that. They're just like little locusts going around looking for someone to speak about a topic. They're not really thinking it through. Politicians don't really solve problems. In fact, they may be the problem. Bucky always told a story that if you take all the politicians on the planet and send them on a one-way ticket around the sun, okay, the world would still get on, and in fact, maybe even better. After 6 months of realizing what that's like, we'd figure out new ways of trading, we'd figure out new ways of doing things, and it might lead to a whole new set of innovations. But if you shut down the technology, within 6 days we'd be all in chaos.
Yes.
Shut down the sewage technology, we'd be shut down. We'd be in trouble within 2 days. So you question who's really in charge. I don't think politicians are in charge. I think with electronic town meetings and with computers and television technology, we can do away with a lot of the so-called political process and have people directly vote. Direct democracy, I think, is something we might see happen in the 21st century.
Well, we do
certainly possible. Theoretically, it's possible.
Yeah, and we certainly see a lot of the discontent that is manifest in the society at large, and one should feel a sense of that as you begin to look at the way things are going. There's a wide discontent. All this talk of town meetings and people feeling disenfranchised, and cynicism of all our leading institutions and so forth is very, very deep, particularly among the young. There's a generational thing that's starting to happen now, who feel as though they've been, there's a real stirring that's going on. We just celebrated the Woodstock Nation. The Woodstock Nation.
You were there,
gathering,
right? I didn't see you there.
I didn't get up there this one. I was at the original one, but I wasn't at this one here. But it went back to, the original went back to 1969 when there was something that was, there was a big transformation that was being sensed at that time. And Fuller always was an anticipatory design, and he used to have a sense of optimism by saying it is possible to see an increase in terms of the number of people who could be seen to be haves in a have-not ratio by ephemeralization or by good design of doing more with less. That is, you can provide more living rate with technologies which are elegant in design and with gossamer materials and so forth. So he had a strong sense of belief in a design revolution more than in a political revolution. And in fact, he thought that a political revolution was futile in a sense.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So that it's really in the sense of having a design revolution. That's what your film is largely, and your project is largely about, I think, right?
Right, that's what we trace the history of design from the beginning of the century to our current time and then speculate on the 21st century, and mostly looking at architecture and design, but of course that spins off into many dimensions, and it really gets down to the level of what the Greeks called ekistics, which is the study of human settlements. How do humans go about settling the landscape? What is that process? How can we trace it in order to understand it better? And how can we intervene and try and be regenerative in our design so that our buildings give more than they take, that our artifacts, our making of things, become more elegant, and that we actually improve the condition on life. And it gets into this question of what is the human function in the universe, which Bucky was very good at asking. And a lot of people say, well, life is just theater and we're just players on the stage. That's the general media and showbiz solution to it. We're just players on the stage, and let's have fun and just play this game out. But I think there is a deeper sense of why we're here, and has something to do with the regenerative potential that we have, or regenerative design, that we are in a sense counter forces to the second law of thermodynamics, that in the physical world everything is breaking down. It's only in the metaphysical world that things develop, that ideas and knowledge always improves. You can't learn less, you always learn more.
That's right.
And that humans, in a sense, keep the world together. We build bridges, we build automobiles, we build cities, and that we do have a very important function of keeping life regenerating, and that our minds have a role to play, and that if we don't get it right on this planet, maybe mind will appear on other planets.
Yeah, or
and that this is we are an experimental initiative of the universe to see if mind can regenerate itself over might, or over just pure dumb matter.
Absolutely, yeah, and that might, and it's so precious when you think of it. I mean, we have a sphere of electromagnetic spectrum going out at the speed of light, 60 light years out from the Earth, that contains all the television programs, and we have no clear evidence. Probability theory tells us it's likely that there is within the cosmos life, but we've not had any any sure contact with it. Rupert Sheldrake will see the universe in sort of organic terms. But Bucky, as you say, also interesting, is a very well-selling popular book, The Road Less Well Taken by Peck. The Scott Peck has his book that's been on the best-selling list for 10 years now. And they both say it is, you look about in universe and you say, is there some purpose? And as you say, the second law of thermodynamics is all systems tend to move toward chaos to the limits of the system. And Bucky looked about and he said, is there some purpose to biological evolution? And it is to move across entropy.
All right.
Or he came to call it syntropy, because he also brought into the common language synergy,
right,
the behavior, the resonant behavior of systems unpredicted by the sum of their parts.
Right.
And so that the purpose of biological evolution was to move across entropy, or
right,
chaos, and bringing peace patterns of understanding to the process of which we are a part. And if you have in a whole systems design the ability to see relationships between, pattern recognizing capability to see relationships between parts or subsystems of an overall system, which is the time in which we live, we may be close to a time of coming into some new resonating reality to universe than that which we've been throughout the human experience, which might be the obverse side of the destructive scenario, that we may be coming into some new relationship to universe now. But you're right.
Yeah, we have to understand our function in the universe, and of course get beyond scarcity economics, this idea of debt, which is a political invention. The universe does not operate according to debt. There's only harvesting and accessing the generalized principles of how the universe works, and then using those principles to support life. This idea of debt is totally fabricated. Who are we in debt to? If we're in debt to anybody, it's the biosphere.
Yeah,
our real debt is to the biosphere that sustains us, rather than the banking system that contains us.
Yeah.
That's my little axiom. And I think we need to understand and get into a cosmic level of understanding of that what sustains life, what is it really, and if it wasn't for photosynthesis, we wouldn't be here.
Yeah, right.
And that the plants really are more in charge than the bankers or politicians.
Right.
We're so caught up in thinking they have solutions or ideas, we're just in the wrong discourse.
Yeah.
So it's, in a sense, you can understand parallel universes and realize that a lot of what we're being told is true is just totally made up.
Yeah, superstring theory tells us that we probably live in a 10-dimensional universe, and that there are parallel universes through black holes, and we're coming into new kinds of understandings, and that we didn't have these understandings 200 years ago in the physics. We didn't have understanding of things, but we do now. And the reality, which in a certain sense is unseen, much of the reality is unseen. It's intuitively grasped changes that might be transpiring, but they're not seen, and we have these institutions that we've inherited and assumptions that we've inherited from the historical condition, and it's very disquieting to feel as though they're taking us toward the abyss with these outmoded ideas and thinking. We want to do that, but we want to give a chance. First of all, we want to show you part of your film, right?
Okay.
This film, and again, it's called Ecological Design, and we're going to
inventing the future.
Inventing the future
Comes from the understanding that if you want to predict the future, the best way is to invent the future.
Right. So this is so we'll set that up in the control room, and we'll run it, and we'll run about 10 minutes.
For thousands of years, humans have adapted to their environments through the process of design. Weaving local materials to meet their needs and intertwining nature's patterns with their lives. Indigenous communities live within the limits of their local ecosystem. Nature, technology, and culture maintain a dynamic balance. The designs of the industrialized world have developed beyond the limits of local ecosystems. Today, our global technologies are depleting the Earth's resources, darkening the skies and waters with waste, and endangering much of life's diversity. Can we invent a more comprehensive way of designing, which will integrate the built world with our larger ecosystem, the biosphere? Can we find a way of life which will create a harmony between nature, technology, and humanity? During the industrial age, engines and fossil fuels exploded the limits of local ecosystems. Distant resources were brought together in the process of mass production. Industry, on an unimagined scale, transformed the landscape, while the goods which poured from the production lines transformed our values. The machine, precise, standardized, specialized, inexhaustible, seemed to promise a future of unlimited growth. The environmental consequences of design seemed remote.
The century began with architects being inspired by an emerging age of industry and technology. I mean, everybody wanted a building to somehow function like a combustion engine. And as an inspirational force in 1910, one can understand it. But as a continuing inspiration in our post-industrial world, or our new world of information and ecology, it doesn't make any sense anymore.
By and large, almost all architecture since the Industrial Revolution has been designed without reference to nature. That is, the environment, either natural or social, was not consequential. Of course, it was absolutely categorically rejected in the international style, where the assumption was that there was a genetic architectural solution which is appropriate to all people in all places at all times, which, of course, has been demonstrated to be inappropriate for all places, all people, at all times.
The modernists saw the building as an isolated object. It was isolated from its environment, and it was isolated from its urban context. It was an object in space and independent of history. All those connections were severed. So the great paradigms that drove the way we think about the built environment were formulated at the turn of the century and largely in the 30s. Le Corbusier in Europe drew Villas Radieuses, which was the towers in the park strategy of urbanism. And Frank Lloyd Wright drew his picture of broadacre cities, which is really the paradigm for the suburb. And they became the kind of visual paradigm that became codified.
Architects like Le Corbusier and Frank Lloyd Wright, in their time, anticipated tomorrow. They anticipated the direction of the future. The problem, of course, in all art forms is that the pioneers often seal the show. In other words, they do all the things that are most interesting in the beginning. And so the residuals that are left over are usually not worth exploring, or at least they're minor explorations at best. You know, how do you go on to the next step, and what is the next step? If machines influence the first half of this century, then clearly a concern for the earth is certainly the iconography or the images of the future. How do we recognize the earth? How do we go back and look at it as a fresh source of imagery? Who amongst designers today will bring about this ecological revolution?
Well, the advantage that a design outlaw has is of just going dead at something instead of having to cycle all of the thoughts and ideas and potential usages, some through institution or other. This is a person who's just figuring out what would be nifty to do next with what's available in the way of tools.
The responsibility of the designer is the outlaw, and the outlaw thinker is certainly to try to reach forward beyond the restrictions of today, beyond the stupidities of the current political situation, whatever that may be, the current way things are done, and say, God, how should we really be doing this?
The world will often think of them as being completely mad, and the world may be right, but we need them like hell because they are the ones who give us the fresh insights and the fresh ideas and the fresh ways of looking at things.
I've been able to live now for almost a half century on the frontier without anybody guaranteeing me anything or telling me what to do. I've learned how to survive there, and one of the things I do is never to try to persuade anybody to. You don't try to sell anything. You see what needs to be done and you do it.
Everyone I know, from Bucky on down, has an extreme, who've become quote-unquote outlaws, has an extreme sense of urgency. That the system that we have created is the potential to undo everything that we would like to see happen.
R. Buckminster Fuller is the quintessential design outlaw. A child of the machine age, he would be one of the first designers to test its limits. In 1927, at the age of 32, Fuller dedicated himself to a design revolution to optimize the way we use the world's resources. A comprehensive approach which would lead to some of the 20th century's earliest experiments in ecological design.
Our resources, we now use them the way we've designed them. Operating at full capacity can only take care of 44% of humanity. 56% of humanity is doomed to early demise, going through great pain and suffering on the way. Therefore, the only way we can possibly take care of everybody is through a design revolution, doing more with less.
Responding to a global housing shortage, in the 30s, Fuller designed the futuristic Dymaxion House. Factory-made units of efficient design, which would cost as little as an automobile, providing better living conditions for more people than ever before.
We feel that this house will help solve the housing problem. The only reason houses have been rectangular all these years is that that is all we could do with the materials we had. Now, with modern materials and technology, we can apply to housing the same engineering efficiency that we apply to suspension bridges and airplanes. The whole house is hung from a central stainless steel mast, weighing only 4 tons in all, in comparison with 150 tons for a conventional house of equal size.
The Dymaxion House was also the prototype of Fuller's lifelong dream, a self-sufficient shelter. This house was designed to regulate its own temperature, clean its own air, conserve water, recycle human waste, and could itself be recycled when obsolete. Technologically smart and socially responsible, Fuller's inventions were ahead of their time. His Dymaxion Car of 1932 was lightweight, streamlined, and energy efficient.
Everything he touched was exemplary. It's hard to think, you know, the late 1930s designed that little Dymaxion car, right? Had an engine equivalent to a lawnmower and an incredible efficiency, during which time Detroit was producing these great turgid behemoths. And of course all they had to do was to listen to Buckminster Fuller, and they could have learned the lesson right there and then. Lightness and efficiency, that's a clue.
Here was a man who talked about the future as something to be dealt with rather than simply met by going about our daily business in the same way we always have. Here was a man who had invented his own geometry, and intellectually the notion that we can design our world rather than taking the things that come out of the factory the way they're being marketed to consumers. This was such a powerful idea to me.
Fuller invented his own geometry, synergetics, to model nature's own way of doing things. In the 1950s, these researches led to the invention of the octet truss and the geodesic dome, the two strongest and lightest structures ever devised. Fuller had succeeded in doing more with less, but his call for a design revolution would have to wait for a generation ready for that message.
Anybody hopes they're going to get somewhere with politics, utterly futile. All you can do with politics is say, I think our side is best. Then in the end, the last recourse of politics is always the guns. And anybody doesn't want war, you're not going to get it by any sit-downs or any objection, any political actions whatsoever. No, you'll only get that by a design revolution.
Right, the film is great. We'd like to run the whole film if we could, and I want to just let people know that this film that you've done is coming. Here we're talking now in August of 1994. Film's coming out when, and we're going to talk about that.
The opening is November 19th and 20th at the Cooper Union School for Art and Design.
Great.
Down in the Village. That'll be the New York opening.
And it's got an accompanying book, right?
Yeah,
that goes into great depth into all of that.
Yeah, there'll be a book coming out in November also that goes into the material in a deeper way than a film can.
And we would like to also let people know that the film, as we get into it more, it goes into Amory Lovins, and it goes into Ian McHarg, and it goes into Catherine Bateson, and a great number of other of these people that are doing. We couldn't show it all. We'd like to have been able to show it all. It's a beautiful, beautiful film, and of course widely recommended by myself, and I congratulate you really very, very much on it. You know, Bucky was quite a fellow there talking, and he was the mind, as it were, of that era. It would seem to me. Stewart Brand said he was an inspiration to that era. He was an inspiration to the whole Earth catalog. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to say he was also, I think he was also the inspiration to the spirit, what is now called the spirit of the 60s, the spirit of Woodstock, the spirit that was trying to be commemorated or trying to be rediscovered this last weekend upstate. It was at that time. There's so much to talk about in terms of what followed in the trail of Bucky, the geodesics and the urban development and the other kinds of problems. But it might be worthwhile. You mentioned it before we went into the film. He was a comprehensive philosopher, and he was a philosopher. He was hard to put a label on because he was a philosopher. I mean, a comprehensivist. But he did have this view of biological evolutionary purpose in the universe. He brought into the English language the word synergy, which had hardly been used at all. Synergy being the behavior of systems unpredicted by the sum of its parts. That there's a resonancy that is more than the sum of the parts of a, if you could say, maximally engaged system. And if you draw off from a system, whereas within a system you may have information overload, with all the information. If you draw away from it, you could begin to see patterns in a comprehensive way. And he used to see the universe as a priori mysterious design made up of a series of interaccommodating, synergistic resonating systems. And he began to see it that way. He had a cosmology. But then when he brought it down into the material world, in a certain sense, he brought it down, and one of the most interesting things that he did, if I may, is he said that mankind throughout all of human history, and I've got a chart, and maybe I can bring it up and explain it for a minute or two first, but he said that throughout all of mankind's history, that technology was an extension of consciousness, and that through the spear we gained power, through the domestication of the horse we got 1 horsepower, but then with Newton we began to get steam power, and the technological development increasingly brought energy equivalencies and the technologically augmented ability to provide for the world citizenry, livingry for the world citizenry. And he always thought whole systems. And he said, in the tape that we just saw, he said that we could only provide for 44% of the world population. He was taking, maybe Ingrid, please, Ingrid's on camera, if we could bring it in. Do you mind if I just do this for a minute? He said in 1954, when he was writing, he said that that we had gone from a situation whereas throughout history, that the technological state that we were in, that less than 1% of the world population could be seen to be halves throughout the long historical development of the human species, 200,000 years, and that we reached the Industrial Revolution and the curve began to go up. This should be a parabolic exponential curve to really take it into account. We tried to show it here, but if the Industrial Revolution began 300 years ago, and then the curve began to go up, and he was optimistic. He said that the technological capability with ephemeralization of good design, being able to do more with less, that it was going up. And in 1954, in his book Ideas and Integrities, that's when he was writing, he said we'd reached a point in 1954 where, in his reckoning, 43%, we'd gone from 1% to where there were 43% of the world population could be seen to be haves in an abstract sense, as opposed to the rest who were have-nots out of this historical model. How you measure have-ness, absolute standards of greed that you have to deal with and so forth, but this have-not standard. And he said in 1954 that we had a 20-year period, if you could come in tight, we had a 20-year period, he was writing in 1954, we'd reached 43%, and this is on a whole world systems understanding. It isn't any one town or one country. And he said we had a 20-year period, approximately, had variations on it, a 20-year period of imminent crisis to all human institutions as we approached and crossed the 50% mark. That would be 50% of the world. 43% of the world had gotten to where, in his world game thinking, could be seen to be haves. And he said in about 20 years out from 1954, the year of the hydrogen bomb, also finding DNA and so forth, but that by 20 years out, that we would cross the 50% mark, and in real terms there would be more haves than have-nots in the world, relative to our abstract technological capability of providing life support. This is what I submit, or I would submit, this is what he wrote about in Intuition, and this is what Bobby Dylan was singing about and was so widely felt. It could only be intuitively grasped. It couldn't be seen in specific terms because we have these inherited institutions that continue, all of which were rooted in scarcity, the ironclad assumption of scarcity. But the spirit of Woodstock, the spirit of 1969, the spirit that was being celebrated around the world and being felt by so many of the artistic people, was that in a cosmological sense, we were transiting a situation where there were now more haves than have-nots on a world system scale, And that is the most important development that there has in the evolution of cosmic history, and in terms of ecological evolution. The fact that there are more haves and have-nots in an abstract, technologically augmented sense is the most important development. And I just wanted to put that down in this chart and refer to it because it was Fuller who did it. And if this is true, if there are more haves than have-nots, this event or this fact is the most important fact, and it should be subjected, I would submit, to something on the order of a Manhattan Project. The best minds of the world should concentrate upon this altered real situation that we've actually transited scarcity in not idealistic terms of what we'd like to think, but in realistic terms that our technologically augmented capability would be able to have us build institutions on the assumption and the real assumption that there is enough and even an opening on scarcity. I wonder if maybe you could address that, or if you don't think Buckminster wanted us to address it.
Who would be against having the world work for everybody, where 100% of humanity had access to the ideas and tools? I don't know who would be against that, other than those people that are benefiting from scarcity. And I don't want to go into naming who they might be, but of course that's where we're headed, and that's worth working for and needs to be communicated more. And if you get into writings about Bucky Fuller and technology and innovation, you see that that's where we're headed. And I think as the Cold War is coming to an end, and we're realizing that all this technology we invested in does not have a trickle-down effect. You can't take a missile and reuse it very well. That this shift that we have to go from killing-re to living-re is part of where we are right now in our evolution as a species. And so we need to reimagine the world in a sense that get new visions of desired futures about what it would be like if we had everything we needed, that everything was available. I think a lot of that has to do with imagination and realizing that that can be done, and getting images of desired futures, because you can trace the rise and fall of a culture by the rise and fall of the image of the future. So we really need to get a postmodern image of what is a desirable future. And we're not getting it from our toxic media that's out there now, so we need to get it through other places. Public access TV, I think, is one place, and independent filmmaking is another place, and I stress independent filmmaking. That's where this film comes out of.
Yeah, I understand. I understand that.
So there are places to get those ideas, and there's a law of diminishment of radical potential that takes place in the mainstream society, that we get these revolutionary technologies like the personal computer, like the video disc, like CD-ROM, like the camcorder, and they get shoved down the existing paradigm. In a sense, we have paradigm paralysis as well as hardening of the categories. And so we have to see these tools as tools of liberation. And it does change the whole game. And getting into an abundance state of mind is understanding that there's something called synchronicity that happens when we think about something, and then a reality happens, and that the universe does operate that way despite the human invention economy that we have. So it's a conscious evolution as well as a technology revolution, and it's knowing how to use the tools and ideas that are available to us.
And the context within which those tools will be able to be done, and how anticipatory design science and good science and ephemeralization will be able to find their way into the design by which we operate interrelated spaceship Earth. The context within which we'll be able to do that is one that is of the, again, back to your original premise and his and Scott Peck's, is that we are here, biological evolutionary purpose is here to move across entropy and bring increased patterns of conscious understanding to the process of which we are a part, and we're at a departure point in terms of that. And there's a great danger of the concentration of the ownership of these turgid systems of production that have come out of the historical condition, and the institutions that have come out of the historical condition, having such absolute power to where they feel as though they can do without species. They're allowing massive numbers of species to disappear. There are people who say there's all that unnecessary detritus on the DNA molecule, you don't need it all, or that it could be carried over into humanity if we're not very careful as we begin to move into
one thing we have to remember,
automated systems and just do away with people. Bell just laid off 5,500 more people from their system as they invested in new switching systems. The technology is increasingly responsible for production, and we're at a very, very dangerous time. But Fuller used to say that if we have a situation, he was a bodhisattva. He said that if one of us is hungry, we are all hungry. Right. And he used to bother some radicals because he was not a socialist.
Right.
He was not one who wanted to do in anybody. He said there's no sense getting in there. He said that if you're interested in presenting an alternative, then it could be one that if you get to where you transcended scarcity as a reality, it would be possible to have, by good design, a system that could bring the have-nots up without bringing the haves down. And it would be possible to include those who've been responsible for the historically inherited institutions in a pattern of understanding, and those who want to change have the responsibility to present an alternative pattern of understanding of change, with radical change, to those who've been responsible, and involve them on their own terms within this process as well, and transcend, in a certain sense, the political dialogue.
Right. Well, we
understand what I'm saying?
Yeah,
it is a philharmonic orchestra where all the instruments have to play,
right,
and not political.
Right. Well, there's another assumption we make is that institutionals think, only individuals think, only the individual mind can think and make decisions. So institutions, in a sense, are human creation, and we assume there's intelligence with CBS or NBC or the White House. That's, I think, a false assumption. The intelligence exists in the individual, and that's where we need to understand and liberate that individual initiative, that individual ability of one person to make a difference. I think that's part of what a design revolution is about, is that each of us have a contribution to make, and that we've made a mistake by thinking we can count on the government to take care of things.
Yeah, except those people in the government are part of it as well, except it's a little bit like a runaway cell within if you have an organism, or you have an organ and then you have an organism in a system's way, and say then you have a Gaia principle, or Sheldrake will see the universe writ large, Gaia, it's organic universe. But if you have that, there must be ecological back and forth between all the cells within the body, and if one of the cells, call it trilateralist or whatever you want to do, if one small group is doing very, very well, we call it cancer.
Right.
The overall system has to be operating well, and as we sit now, they do not have visionary. We do not have visionary leadership that ecologically relates us, and particularly us, to the other biological systems that the times do call for. Don't you think? We need visionary leadership, and it might do well to go visionary understanding. It might do well to go back to Buckminster Fuller and many of the good people who followed in his wake, in order to recapture some of that, which seems the young people have not picked up on as much as they might well have over these past years.
Yeah, I'd say there are leaders out there. We may not know about them. They may be working on a local level, and they're not superstars, they're not movie stars, but there are local heroes, and there's a distinction between hero and celebrity.
Yeah, definitely.
That's a big one. We have more celebrities in this culture than we have heroes. At least we hear about the celebrities. But I think there's a lot of people out there working on...
I mean, in a legitimately visionary sense, the way Fuller was.
Yeah.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
Well, where are those people now? Well, we asked that question in the film.
That's what I'm saying. The film is so important.
They do exist.
Right, because you bring a number of those people up, but still, it doesn't seem to be, in a sense, there are many more. And the book that you have goes into many more of those who are there, who are trying to to work within this and the ecological movement, in a sense of ecological, and city planning, and the need to begin to come into city environments and to make changes at the city at all levels, and the need for there to be a change is coming. But there's a great deal of frustration against the entropy or the traditional systems which seem to be prevailing in terms of the operation of the system. I don't know if you see it that way, but...
Well, there's a principle in the design that the best of the old tends to be better than the first of the new. Nature makes many starts, especially when she has something important to do. So there's many experiments and there's many energy events happening right now in terms of moving us towards a sustainable or regenerative economy. It hasn't reached a critical mass yet. We're still importing 50% of our oil, and we still have an infrastructure that's based on petroleum. But I think we have the consciousness now that we have to get beyond that, and we have the tools of information to start networking around that. So there's reasons to be optimistic that that's where we're moving towards. And as I said before, we need images of a desired future in order to continue as a culture. And I think if people really get into this subject of ecological design and regenerative thinking, that there are reasons to be optimistic, and the technologies and ideas are there. How to get it more democratized is a good question. Books, films, public access TV, that's one of the places.
Yeah, those things should all be encouraged.
And, turn off your mainstream networks, because they're all based on the reactive, responsive approach to going towards the future rather than the visionary approach. They're more interested in spotting a problem and then giving all kinds of symptoms of that problem. So they stay in this recursive cycle of problems and don't break out into the loop of ideas and visions. And that's not something that's encouraged for whatever reason. I don't want to get negative.
No, we don't want to get negative if we can help it. And you want to be able to leave an opening to where this idea, I think Fuller would want it to be one where it is able to be inclusive of people. It's a matter of consciousness raising and understanding, and anticipatory design application is what is called for, more than some sort of a confrontation, and perhaps be able to see it rather than enemies. We're all in this boat together in a very real sense, and we're at a crucial time where we're heading for the precipice, and we really need some sort of a qualitative transformation to understand new realities. And your film, Ecological Design, brings up a lot of these things, and it couldn't be more highly recommended, and particularly the book that follows upon it. And I want to really congratulate you on all of that work, for doing that and helping to bring to light all of the fine people that you do in the film and in the book. And I would remind you in the case, I'm sorry we've run out of time, we go on talking a lot, and I had a tendency to talk too much.
Well, you're an enthusiast.
Well, I'm
important.
an enthusiast for Mr. Buckminster Fuller and Marshall McLuhan, and I would say binary economics, which is another system we can get into, but there's a new economics that we need in order to deal with the digital binary world. We need new economics, but we're running out of time. That's it. Chris Zelov, Kenosis Project, Ecological Design. Thank you. We'll be coming back again. Once again, Chris, thank you very, very much indeed. Good night. We'll see you next time.
Believe will mature to the point where we can reach consensus about what a living structure really is and work our way towards it.
And I believe that homemaking is something that everyone, men and women, human beings, could think of doing on this planet. Making this earth increasingly our home. You know, we don't want to mess up our home.